Okay, so we're going to start on the second part of chapter 6 now, which is called the Dominion of Canada. Here we go.
The Dominion of Canada. Far to the north of South America, another country reached for independence. Canada became free in 1867, just 2 years after the end of the American Civil War. But the story of Canada's independence actually begins 300 years earlier, when French and English colonists both settled in the northern reaches of North America. As the settlements grew, France and Britain struggled over who would control them. In 1763, after bitter fighting, the French surrendered their colonies to British rule. The British divided their new Canadian colony into two parts. The French-speaking colonists were in Lower Canada, today called Quebec. The English-speaking colonists lived in Upper Canada, later known as Ontario.
Okay, so that's in the outline, number 1 and 2. Lower Canada was French-speaking, and Upper Canada was English-speaking. And, yeah, that's it.
Both parts of Canada were governed by English-speaking officials of Great Britain, but the French Canadians kept their language and their French customs, even under British rule. When war between Great Britain and the United States broke out in 1812, neither Upper nor Lower Canada joined in the fight. Most Canadians wanted to remain part of Great Britain, but after the War of 1812 ended, more and more Canadians began to complain that Great Britain was not giving them the chance to govern themselves.
Okay, so what two countries settled the northern reaches of North America? That's number 1. The answer is France and Great Britain. Number 2, which country won the fight to control all the northern colonies? Great Britain's going to win the fight. What were the two parts of Canada called? They were called Lower and Upper Canada. What languages did the people of Lower and Upper Canada speak? People of Lower Canada spoke French, and people in Upper Canada spoke English. What did Canadians want Great Britain to let them do? They wanted Great Britain to let them govern themselves. Okay, and here we go.
These complaints were the loudest in Lower Canada. French Canadians had their own elected group of leaders, the Assembly of Lower Canada. But by law, the English governor of Lower Canada had the final word in all matters of law, and he ignored all of the Assembly's suggestions. A tall, handsome, dark-haired Frenchman named Louis-Joseph Papineau believed that the governor should be forced by law to pay attention to the elected Assembly. The French Canadians who agreed with him formed into a group called the Patriots.
Okay, so this is our start of the two great groups, okay? So the first group, 2 Canadian leaders wanted changes in the way Canada was governed. This is on number 2 in the outline. Louis-Joseph Papineau, and you can just put Papineau, capital P, A-P-I-N-E-A-U, wanted the governor of Lower Canada to pay attention to the Assembly, all right? And then we're going to talk about the second leader, and and that's the same answer for number 6 on your review questions, okay? Same thing as the outline. And his followers were called, in number 7, patriots. But patriot is spelled P-A-T-R-I-O-T-E-S, okay? They were called patriots.
Papineau traveled through Lower Canada, exhorting French Canadians to protest the power of the English governor. His speeches worked a little too well. By 1837, the Patriots had whipped so much indignation that masses of French Canadians were planning on arming themselves and rebelling, just as the Americans had done. Papineau went to the countryside again, but this time he was pleading with French Canadians to stop and think before they began to fight. His pleas didn't work. French Canadians, under the leadership of the Patriots, set up their headquarters in a stone-walled village called Saint-Denis on the banks of the Richelieu River. On November 23, 1837, British soldiers marched down from Montreal, intending to invade Saint-Denis and arrest the Patriot leaders. But after less than a day of fighting, the Patriots had driven the attackers away. The British weren't about to give up so easily. More soldiers came flooding down from Montreal, poured over the walls of Saint-Denis, and burned the village down.
Okay, so How did French Canadians respond to his speeches? They began to plan an armed rebellion. They wanted to rebel. When the Patriots set up headquarters at Saint Denis, what happened next? And the British soldiers marched down from Upper Canada and were driven away. But they finally burned the village of Saint Denis down. Now, the next section is going to talk to us about the second person, the second Canadian leader. That'll be 2B. And so listen closely.
Immediately, a short, red-headed Canadian in Upper Canada saw his chance. William Lyon Mackenzie, the son of the Scottish family, had been loudly complaining for years that the governor of Upper Canada didn't listen to the Assembly of Upper Canada any more than the Lower Canada governor listened to the Assembly of Lower Canada. Now, Mackenzie realized that all of the soldiers stationed in Upper Canada had gone down to fight in Lower Canada. It was the perfect time for Upper Canadians to rebel. Mackenzie managed to gather a little crowd of discontented Upper Canadians around him. The tiny army set off to attack Toronto. But most Upper Canadians didn't want to fight a war against the British. As Mackenzie's group of rebels approached Toronto, thousands of Upper Canadians loyal to Great Britain gathered against them. The army fell apart immediately. William Mackenzie ran away. He knew that he would be arrested as soon as the British could find him, so he dressed his short body in skirts and women's shawls and sneaked across the border into the United States. Down in Lower Canada, the tall, aristocratic Papineau also fled across the border into the United States.
Okay, so Mackenzie is spelled M-A-C and then K-E-N-Z-I-E. And why did William Lyon Mackenzie think that this would be a good chance for the Upper Canadians to rebel? The soldiers in Upper Canada had gone down to fight in Lower Canada. So now we could rebel, right? Because the soldiers are gone. How did the people of Toronto react to Mackenzie's little band of Upper Canadian rebels? They were loyal to Great Britain and gathered together against the rebels. And where did both Mackenzie and Papineau flee? They fled into the United States. And then also in your outline, 2B then is Mackenzie, and he wanted Upper Canadians to revolt against the British. Okay.
Britain had kept hold of its Canadian colonies, but the rebellion had frightened British officials. They sent a nobleman named the Earl of Durham to go to Canada and find out how to prevent another revolt. When the Earl of Durham returned from Canada, he reported that the Canadians would probably never rebel again, as long as the assemblies were given the power to govern their own country. So the British decided to rearrange the government of Canada. Lower and Upper Canada would become one colony with one British governor. Each one of the separate areas, or provinces, in Canada would also have its own leader, a lieutenant governor who would help the British governor. Each province would also have its own elected assembly. All of the provinces together would send elected representatives to a bigger assembly, the Assembly of the United Canadas.
Okay, so what report did the Earl of Durham make? He reported that the Canadians weren't going to revolt again as long as you did this correctly. All right, they want good representation. And so after the revolts, Canada had two different kinds of elected assemblies. 3A, each province elected its own assemblies. And 3B, all the provinces sent representatives to the Assembly of the United Canadas. So they had their own representatives, and then they would go to the assemblies of the United Canadas. Now, I think we'll do the map at the end. So we'll just keep going, and we'll do the map at the end.
The British had given the Canadians plenty of elected assemblies, but none of the assemblies had the power to overrule either the governor of all Canada or the lieutenant governors of the provinces. So Canadians kept on writing, speaking, and arguing about their right to govern themselves. Finally, the lieutenant governor of the province of Nova Scotia agreed to let the Assembly of Nova Scotia choose all of his advisors. These advisors would tell him how to govern. Now the Assembly of Nova Scotia, not the governor, held the greatest power in the province. Before too long, the governor of Canada and the Assembly of the United Canadas followed the same procedure. Over time, the elected assemblies had managed to gain the power to govern Canada.
Okay, so what did the new lieutenant governors of Canada do? They governed the provinces and helped the British governor. Who still had the final say in Canada? The British governor. What new thing happened in Nova Scotia? The lieutenant governor allowed the assembly to have the greatest power in the province. And I think that's it for that section.
By the 1860s, the Canadian provinces were talking about joining together into a federation. This federation would still be loyal to Great Britain, but it would have its own constitution, its own Canadian House of Commons, and its own Canadian Senate. Canadians had good reasons for wanting a federation. Many Canadians were afraid that the Western Territories of Canada, the area not yet formed into provinces, would be taken by the United States, unless Canadians could join together and claim those territories for a strong, united Canada. Most Canadians didn't want to belong to the United States, especially since the horrible Civil War had just ended. One 19th century poster, urging Canadians to join together in a federation, had a British flag on one side with the words, "Loyalty to Great Britain, protection." On the other side, these words were written across a faded American flag. Yankee grit, annexation, ruin. Annexation meant that the United States would take Canadian territories for its own. The provinces argued and argued about forming a federation. Smaller provinces, like Prince Edward Island, were afraid that a federation would give the larger provinces too much power. But finally, Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick decided to join together. A new law, called the British North America Act, formed these four provinces into a new country called the Dominion of Canada. The British North American Act also explained how the Western Territories of Canada could be formed in...
Okay, so we've got some other questions there. What was the name of the big assembly that finally gained the power to govern all of Canada? It was called the Assembly of the United Canadas. Many of the provinces wanted to join a federation. What three things would this federation have of its own? Its own constitution, its own House of Commons, and its own Senate. Why did many Canadians want to protect the Western Territories of Canada? They didn't want the United States to claim them. What four provinces finally joined together in the Dominion of Canada? Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. And I actually do want to go ahead and look at the map because I want you to make sure you have this so you can kind of picture what some of the places are they're talking about. So here is your map, okay? So the province on the very far left, which would be over Washington State, that's British Columbia. And then there's kind of a blank in the middle, and then there's Manitoba, Manitoba. Then there's Ontario, and then there's Quebec. Okay, so those are the four provinces that would be there.
Formed into provinces and then drawn into the Dominion of Canada. The act took effect on Monday, July 1st, 1867. Cannons and fireworks were shot off. Canadians threw parties all over the new Dominion of Canada. Parades and speeches celebrated the birth of this new country. In the next 3 years, 3 more provinces decided to join the Dominion of Canada: Manitoba, British Columbia, and Prince Edward Island. By 1900, the Dominion of Canada stretched all the way to the west coast of North America. The Western Territories of Canada would never belong to the United States. Victoria, the Queen of England, was still the Queen of Canada. But just as England was really governed not by Victoria, but by the British Parliament, so Canada would now be governed by its own House of Commons and Senate. Canada wasn't free from Great Britain, but it was independent.
Okay, so the last part of the outline, number 4, a Canadian federation would be independent but not separate from Great Britain. The Federation A would be loyal to Great Britain, and the Federation would have its own Constitution, House of Commons, and Senate. Okay, so that's the last part of the outline. And then what 4 provinces joined together in the Dominion of Canada? I think I already read that. Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. What 3 provinces joined by 1900? British Columbia, Manitoba, and Prince Edward Island joined. And on your map, okay, Prince Edward Island, it's a little hard to see, is this tiny little island that's above Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia is this thing jutting out right here. So you may need to look at a map of Canada if that's on the backwards for you. I got to check and see if these are backwards or not. Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. Also, it says in here, during one of the revolts of Canada, William Lyon Mackenzie marched his rebels toward a certain Canadian city. Label this city on your map. And it was Toronto. And Toronto is right here in Ontario. So it's the dot in Ontario. It's kind of at the bottom of Ontario. So I think, last question. Who was the Queen of Canada? Queen Victoria of England. And who really governed Canada? The Canadian House of Commons and the Senate really governed Canada. So that's a quick history on some the Dominion of Canada.